Micah Sturgis, last name Sturgis.
Good afternoon, Mr. Sturgis.
Good afternoon.
To start with, can you just tell us about yourself? Where are you from?
Sure. My name is Micah Sturgis. I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina. I am the Director of Digital Forensics for Barefoot Professional Investigations.
Pull the mic a little closer.
Sorry. Better?
Yeah.
I'm the Director of Digital Forensics for Barefoot Investigations.
Okay. And tell us about your experience in law enforcement and then cell phone forensics.
Sure. So from 2004 until 2016, I was employed by the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office. It's a full-service sheriff's office located in Cleveland County, North Carolina. They're on the border of North and South Carolina. During that time period from 2004 to 2006, I was a patrol deputy. In 2006, I was promoted to a corporal or training officer, where I trained new hires. In 2009, I was promoted to detective. In that capacity, I handled everything from larcenies to murders, and then I took on the role of the digital forensic examiner for the sheriff's office. It was the first one that we had, and I formed the digital forensics lab at the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office.
And before we get more into digital forensics, you've been involved in murder investigations before?
I have, yes.
Okay. As a lead detective?
As a lead detective, yes.
And then as you go into digital forensics, tell us about your experience with digital forensics in law enforcement, and then afterwards, and then after that we'll get to your certifications and training.
Sure. As the digital forensic examiner for the sheriff's office, it was my responsibility to handle all the digital evidence that came into the lab, and I was also in charge of ordering things that needed to be ordered and stocked up on for digital forensic purposes. And during that time period, I was sponsored by the United States Secret Service to attend the National Computer Forensics Institute in Hoover, Alabama, where I was trained in mobile device examination, multiple tools, Cellebrite, Blackthorn, which is a form of burla ivy, XRY, which is another forensics tool, Paraben was another tool that we used, and so I received that training from the NCFI. They also sent me back with several things, one of which being a laptop computer or a MacBook in order to do examinations on, and also a Ramsey's box or a Faraday box that I used to use whenever we had phones that came in.
And let's just, since we're kind of on it, could you go through the training you've had in digital evidence?
Sure. So I have had the basic and intermediate cell phone forensic courses, introduction, intermediate, and advanced, computer forensics, internet investigations, introduction to wireless investigations. I was a Lantern certified examiner, attended the Lantern cell phone training. Lantern is a forensics tool for Apple devices, primarily Apple devices, does some Androids. Apple iOS forensics, I attended that at the American Academy of Applied Forensics in Charlotte. Cyber investigations, I was nominated and sent to the National Computer Forensics Institute by the United States Secret Service, where I received my mobile device examiner certification. I also received Cellebrite certifications while there at the NCFI, and Paraben mobile forensic training, Cellebrite certified physical analyst, received XRY training at the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and took the XRY intermediate courses. In 2017, I attended the Infuse conference in Las Vegas, Nevada, where I sat for my ENC written examination. Later came back to Charlotte and did the practical examination, where I was certified as an in-case certified examiner in 2017. And attended the Magnet User Summit a couple of times, received some training on their tool there at one in Las Vegas, the other in Nashville. Received introduction to alternate data acquisition training, wireless analysis training. I received my Lantern certified examiner from Katana Forensics my XRY certified examiner from MSAB, the Cellebrite Mobile Forensics Fundamental Certification, the Cellebrite Certified Operator Certification, Cellebrite Physical Analyst Certification, and then the Cellebrite Certified Mobile Examiner Certification, and also my in-case Certified Examiner Certification.
And can you tell us about how many extractions or acquisitions of digital evidence you've performed?
Sure. Well over 500 logical physical acquisitions and extractions using Lantern, the Apple device forensic tool, Cellebrite, Blackthorn, XRY, Paraben, and well over 750 images of hard disk drives or solid state drives of computers, and analyzing that data within either FTK or in-case. FTK's Forensics Toolkit. It's a forensic suite. Examining an in-case Magnet IEF, which is Internet Evidence Finder. That's what they started out as. They're now Magnet Axiom is the product that they produce and put out. So I've used Axiom to do multiple examinations with that. Image with hardware forensic imagers like the Forensic Falcon. I've used Paladin to get live acquisitions, Macquisition for Macs, and Recon ITR for MacBooks. Also had to collect checkpoint encrypted devices with my time at the bank.
And that leads into, when did you leave law enforcement and what have you done since you left?
Sure. In 2016, I received a phone call from an individual who owned a private firm in Charlotte, and I went to work for him as a digital forensic examiner in the South Park area of Charlotte.
Okay. And after?
After that, I worked for him from 2016 until roughly 2019, and then I went to Wells Fargo, where I was one of 24 examiners for the Wells Fargo and Company. After leaving Wells Fargo in 2021, I went and formed this lab at Barefoot Professional Investigations.
And have you ever been qualified as an expert by court to testify before?
Yes, I have in both criminal and defense work.
Okay. Criminal work, civil cases?
And civil as well, yes.
And in the criminal cases, have you been on the defense side, the prosecution side, both sides?
I've been on both.
Okay. Have you ever been qualified as an expert in digital forensics in a murder case before?
I have, yes, in 2015.
And was that for the prosecution?
It was for the prosecution.
Your Honor, at this time I would offer the witness as an expert in cell phone forensics.
No objection, Mr.
So qualified.
Hey, Mr. Sturgis, before we get into the what we're here to talk about, are you paid by the defense to be here?
I am.
And how much?
My rate is $300 an hour for any type of examination work or consultation, and then $600 an hour to be on the stand.
And does that go to the company that employs you?
It does.
In your experience, are you aware of anyone who does this work for free for the defense?
No, I'm not. In fact, I do IDS work.
What is that?
IDS work is indigent service, so people who can't afford defense experts, and I do that work, and the state pays me.
Turning to this case, have you? What information have you reviewed regarding the cell phones in this case?
Everything that I've been able to look at and review has been provided by the state.
And specifically the extractions, where
Right,
they're from?
specifically the extractions of the mobile devices and reports that they've produced.
So you haven't done anything independent of what the state has provided?
No, only the state's data.
Okay. And have you had a chance to review the timeline that's been introduced into evidence in this case? I believe it was, I don't have the exhibit number on me, but the large timeline of events. It was
The one provided by the state, yes.
And as far as the cell phone information goes, is that timeline accurate?
It is there, with the exception of a couple of things based off interpretation of the data, but for the most part, yes, it is accurate.
Is anything missing?
There are two instances where there's some things from the Knowledge C database that aren't in the report that I've been able to locate and identify.
Okay, and we'll later on get to that, but we won't have to belabor it because we'll just sort of be filling in those gaps. But there are three phones here, Paul, Alec, Maggie, Murdaugh. What did you do with Paul's phone, if anything?
With Paul's phone, the extraction reports that I received, there wasn't much data after 8:49, somewhere in that time, on 6/7. So I didn't really focus much on that one. With Alex's phone, that one reviewed the steps that were there in the Apple Health sections. And with Maggie, I really focused my attention on Maggie's.
Okay. So we'll focus on her phone. Was there any GPS data on her phone?
There was GPS data, but there was nothing from 6/7.
And remember when the GPS data started?
It was 6/9.
Okay. And you mentioned when talking about, I think, your qualifications, Faraday bags or boxes. What are those?
So a Faraday bag or a Faraday shield is something that completely takes the device off the network. It also prevents GPS signal from reaching the device and changing data to the device.
You could describe your experience working with those in law enforcement?
Sure. So part of my responsibility when I worked at the Sheriff's Office as head of the Digital Forensics Lab was to make purchases. So I would purchase these Faraday bags for our patrol officers. So when they came out on scene and came across, if we had an instance of a crime where a phone was used and they needed to seize that phone, they had access to those bags, either in their cars or back at the office in the shared vault room where they could go in and put their evidence up. And if it's a good bag, which, if you buy the right bag and the phone's put in there the proper way, then it prevents signal from reaching the phone.
And then, did you mention a box?
Yes, so it was a Ramsey's box, is what I called it. The Secret Service provided that to me when I left their training. And with that box, what I would do is I'd take the phone from the Faraday, or from evidence that was in the Faraday bag wrapped up, put it inside the Faraday box, or the Ramsey's box. It has two gloves that I'd shove my hands into. My computer and the forensic software would be plugged into the side of the Ramsey's box. It was a powered box. There was a light on the inside, so it had a window I could look into, and then I could manipulate the bag and open it up and pull the phone out and keep everything in that Faraday shield.
In your opinion, if Maggie Murdaugh's phone had been secured in the way you've just described, would it have GPS data from 6/7?
It likely would have.
Can we show what's been admitted as State's Exhibit 278? Can we show what's been admitted as State's Exhibit 278, please? And can we see the top of the screen? Sir, do you know what the little arrow in the top left of the phone screen is?
That's the locations. I'm sorry. That's a location services arrow.
And I probably should have asked first, this was admitted as a photo of Maggie Murdaugh's phone in the lab before the extraction. Have you seen this before? Do you recognize it?
Yes, I have.
And again, that arrow indicates...
Yes, that location services are active on the device, even though the phone's in airplane mode.
Does that mean that right there in the lab it's writing GPS data?
Yes.
You can take that down. I'll show you what's been marked as Defendant's Exhibit 156. I'll ask you if you recognize that.
I do. This is Alex Murdaugh's steps and Maggie Murdaugh's steps from the Apple Health data.
Your Honor, I would offer, I believe without objection, Defendant's Exhibit 156 into evidence.
No judgment.
Submitted.
Pull up, it's the Apple. I'm going to just ask you to explain what some of these terms are. How does, and obviously from the title, this is out in Murdaugh's phone. How does the phone come up with that steps number?
So there are accelerometers.
Mic a
I'm
little
sorry.
closer, please.
I hope I sit up a little further. There's accelerometers inside the device. So whenever the phone is jostled or moved and there's the accelerometers move, then that accelerometer data logs a step. So independent upon where the device is, if it's on your waist or in your pocket or you're holding it in your hand when you're walking, that movement of the accelerometer indicates those steps.
And what does, how does it come up with the distance that corresponds with those steps?
It uses the satellite's GPS.
And what does the start and stop times, what do they mean?
So in the Apple Steps or Apple Health data here, you see, for instance, entry 26, that the between the times of 7:55:32 and 8:05:07, that 270 steps were taken during that time period.
Okay. Now, do we know when in that time period the steps occurred?
We know that the steps or the logging of those steps started at 7:55 and 32 seconds, but whether we don't know each individual step, when each individual step took place. We just know that sometime during that time frame, those 270 steps were taken.
And between the steps numbers and the distance, do you have an opinion on which one is maybe more accurate?
In my opinion, the steps are going to be more accurate.
Why is that?
Because of the accelerometer and the hardware in the phone, they're more accurate.
Does that mean that the distance is not useful information?
It doesn't mean that the distance isn't useful information. I think the totality of everything altogether is what we have to look at here.
Go to the second page. And is this the same thing for Maggie Murdaugh's phone?
It is.
Before we get into time, just some other things to cover. There's been a lot of talk so far about orientation changes. You can take that down, that exhibit. What is an orientation change on an iPhone?
So an iPhone has two orientations. It has a portrait or up and down, or a landscape, which is horizontal or sideways. And whenever the device is backlit, that's when the orientation change will log and show. Now, we're not specifically talking about like a phone. If you physically take the phone and turn it like this, we're not talking about the physical.
I'm going to just interrupt a second. I know they don't let you have a phone, but since you're gesturing,
Thank you.
There's a phone that might.
So what we're talking about is not the physical positioning of the phone, but the orientation of the data that you're reading on the device, that orientation change.
And what do the start and end times mean for an orientation change?
So when a orientation change is made, a start time is logged. That's the start time of the orientation change that you're seeing on the device itself.
And for Maggie's phone, what was the last orientation change? When was that?
I believe that was 9:06 and 12 seconds p.m. on 6/7.
And when did that one end or complete?
I believe that was 9:06 and 20 seconds.
And at when it completed, what was the orientation of the phone for the rest of the time?
It was in portrait mode.
Okay. If the screen is off, can an orientation change occur?
If the screen is off, no, the orientation change can't occur.
If the orientation change happens in the database at the exact moment the screen comes on, does that tell you anything?
When I see that, when I see a orientation change at the exact time that the screen is lit up, if the device was in horizontal or landscape mode and then moved into portrait mode and the screen comes on, then all of a sudden, the exact same time, it changes into portrait mode. To me, that indicates that the phone was was in a portrait mode position, and then the screen comes on, and then the orientation change takes place inside the phone.
So does that mean that movement when the screen is off can appear as an orientation change when the screen comes on?
When the screen comes on, yes. When the screen's backlit, that's when the orientation change. It cannot make an orientation change unless the back screen's lit.
So kind of moving on then to, we've talked about orientation changes and they don't happen when the screen is off, as you said. Can motion of the phone turn on the screen?
Yes. Very little motion can turn on a screen.
And what is the raise to wake feature on that?
So the Apple has a raise to wake feature that's set by default. Currently, this phone, and unfortunately you can't see there.
Well,
but
could you, if the court's permission, could you come down to show the jury?
currently the phone is on. Now it's on. See that small movement. Can I put it right here? No? Okay. The slight raising of the phone will indicate. So when the phone's here, if you raise the phone, it raises to wake. So if you raise the phone like that, if the phone's flipped over, and flip the phone back over, it wakes up. If you move the phone from this mode to here, the phone comes on. So that's the raise the wake function.
And was this feature turned on Maggie Murdaugh's phone on June 7th?
By all indications on the database, there were that it was there. Yes.
Are you familiar with the location of Maggie Murdaugh's phone when it was covered by law enforcement on 680?
I am.
And have you reviewed the recently received GPS data for Alex Murdaugh's Suburban when it was passing that location?
I did.
Okay. So do you know when the Suburban passed the location of the phone?
When it was leaving the house where the crimes took place, it was around 9:08 when it was passing the location where that phone was located. And then on the return trip back, it was 9:59, I believe 19 seconds.
Was Maggie Murdaugh's phone screen off during those times?
Yes.
Now you're just here as a cell phone expert, right?
That's correct.
So can you offer any expert opinion on how a phone would tumble or bounce or move when thrown from a car going 40 plus miles an hour, into the brush in the side of a country road?
No, there's just too many variables, and I'm not an expert on physics. So.
Can you tell us how much motion would be required for the screen to come on a phone?
Very little. Just reaching and picking this phone up like I just did there, the phone comes on. So just very little.
Okay. And again, in the times that Alex Murdaugh's car was passing, the screen never came on.
That's correct. The database indicated it was off.
Turn to Maggie Murdaugh's phone. Show you what's been marked distance in. That's 158. Do you recognize this?
I do.
And what is it?
This is a PowerPoint presentation printed off that you put together, but it's based off of the Knowledge Seed database
Right.
data that I
And to be
reviewed.
clear, I typed it into PowerPoint. Have you reviewed every slide in that presentation?
I have.
Have you verified the data on every slide?
I have.
And you've confirmed independently the data on every slide?
Yes.
No objection.
Your Honor, I would offer, it's been marked as defendant's 158 into evidence. so I'm going to go through this. No, don't zoom the screen. So we're looking at just a very short period of time, right? Can you describe the time period we're looking at?
Yes, this is on June 7th, from 8:49 p.m. until 9:07 p.m.
All right, so we're going to go through here and just see exactly what was happening with her phone on that time. So it's the next slide, please. And what's happening here?
At 8:49:26
You can pull the mic closer, please.
Sorry. At 8:49:26, that's the last text message that was read by Maggie. It was indicated read on the device.
Next.
At 8:49:28, the backlight goes off.
And what does that mean?
That means that
The screen?
the screen's dark. Yeah, sorry.
And next.
At 8:49:31, the phone locks, and it remains locked until it's recovered by law enforcement the next day.
Next.
At 8:53:08, the backlight comes back on. The phone's eliminated.
And next.
And 8:53:12, orientation to portrait starts.
Next.
At 8:53:15, that's when the phone began logging the 59 steps.
Next.
And
it's on the screen. And
yep, sorry. And at 8:53:20, there's Siri usage. This was indicated in the Knowledge C database, and that can be done by squeezing the side button, holding on to it for a short period of time, and Siri activates at that point.
So this is a user interface, you know.
Yes,
somebody squeezing the phone.
it actually shows up as Siri UI, so it's a Siri user interface.
Next.
At 8:53:24, the orientation to portrait completes.
Next.
At 8:53:28, the backlight goes off again, so the phone's dark.
Next.
At 8:53:32, the backlight comes back on the phone and eliminates.
Next.
At 8:53:44, the backlight goes off again.
Do you have any opinion about why it just popped on and off like that?
I mean, there were no indications in the Knowledge C database that any notifications came in or anything of that nature. The only thing I could think would be that the phone were jostled or lifted, or somehow the light came on.
And next.
At 8:54:32, the backlight comes on.
Next.
At 8:54:34, there's an entry in the Knowledge C database about the camera usage. Camera starts. So in that, there are in that database, and if you don't mind, I'll kind of expand on this. In that database, the Knowledge C database is comprised of tables and rows and columns. And in that database, on that specific item where the camera was, there is another column that is called the Z-structured metadata. And so if I follow the camera under the value string there, indicating that the camera was activated, if I follow that line all the way across to where that structured database is, structured metadata is in that table, I'll get a PK number, a primary key number. That number was 571. In the Knowledge C database, there's another table within the Knowledge C database called Z structured metadata. So if I go to that table, because I found that number under the Z structured metadata column, if I go to that specific table in the database and look for that primary key 571, and I scroll all the way out to the end, I'll see a description of what that 571 is. And in that case, here, it was com.apple.springboard.lockscreen.scroll, which would indicate that it was a camera function on the lock screen, and that when you press that button in the bottom right corner of the phone that has the little camera indication, it'll scroll over to a camera, or you can swipe over from the left, and then it indicates that there's a camera there.
So was this some sort of attempt by the phone on its own at Face ID?
It didn't indicate that it was a Face ID at all. It indicated that it was a camera.
And by indicated cameras, did it indicate that someone was a person using the phone activated the camera.
Yes.
Okay. Next.
At 8:54 and 35 seconds, the camera use ends.
Okay. And keeping in mind the time stamp, go to the next slide.
At 8:54 and 40 seconds, the orientation to landscape starts.
Okay. And so how long was that since the camera usage?
About 5 seconds since it ended.
Next slide.
And then at 8:54 and 44 seconds, the orientation to landscape ends.
And next.
At 8:55 and 4 seconds, the backlight turns off and the orientation to portrait starts.
Now, lots happening on this one. What's happening here?
Yep, so right here, the phone was previously in landscape mode, and it settled in at that landscape mode at 8:44 seconds. The backlight went off at 8:55 and 4 seconds. At that same time, the orientation of portrait starts, and that's this is indicative of what I was talking about earlier. When you rotate the phone while it's in the screen's not lit, and then the screen comes on and the orientation changes once the screen pops on. It'll flip over to wherever camera or wherever the phone is turned to. At this time, orientation to portrait ends at that time, and the orientation to the landscape starts at that time. So that's exactly what I was talking about. And then the phone stops logging those 59 steps at that time as well.
I'm going to kind of emphasize this. Could we go back 4 slides? All right. So when the camera use ends here, 8:54:35, going forward, one slide, we have an orientation change.
That's correct. To the landscape starts, yes. Orientation to the landscape ends at 44 seconds after.
And then the next slide. So now that the screen has gone off, how long has it been since the camera use?
Let me go back in my. So it's 8:55 and 04. Since the camera use ended at 8:54 and 35, and then the backlight goes off at 8:55 and 4 seconds. So, what is that, a minute?
Is that 29 seconds?
Wait a minute, hang on, sorry. Yeah, it's 29. I apologize. My math was terrible, wasn't it? Yes.
And then going forward, so what we had in that 29 seconds was an orientation change, and then the screen goes off.
Right, that's correct. Where are we going with it now? It just flipped the slide on me.
All right, so let's go back to the slide that's timestamped 8:55:32. Is this where we left off?
That's where we left off, yes. So here, the backlight's on, the orientation to portrait ends, and then the orientation to landscape starts immediately when the backlight comes back up on the phone. And then the phone stops logging those 59 steps at that time as well.
And the next slide, 4 seconds later.
4 seconds later, the backlight's back off again.
Okay. Now we'll go kind of quickly here. The next slide comes on.
9:03, the backlight's on. At 9:04 and 23, we have a missed call from Alex that starts. At 9:04 and 23, the backlight goes off.
But now let's go back to the previous slide.
One more.
The backlight went off at the exact same time that the call came in from Alex Murdaugh.
That's correct, yes.
And now the next slide.
And then we have a missed call from Alex that ends.
That's the
at
call we
9:04.
just saw, right, ending.
Yes.
Do you have an opinion on why the screen light would go off pretty much right when a call comes in?
The only thing that I could figure is when the phone came in, the call came in, that the person hit the side button to turn it off and then put it down or flip the phone over.
Do you know of anything on the phone that would cause the screen to go off right when a call comes in and stay off during the call that does not involve human interaction with the phone?
No, I don't.
I'll go to the next slide.
9:05 and 44 seconds, the backlight comes back on. And at 9:06 and 12 seconds, an orientation change to portrait begins.
Okay. And the next one, and we'll stop on that.
At 9:06 and 14 seconds, there's an incoming call from Alex that starts at that time.
And then the next one,
And then the incoming call from Alex ends at 9:06 and 18 seconds.
and the next slide.
And then we have an orientation change to portrait ends at 9:06 and 20
And
seconds.
stopping here, that call we just saw coming in from Alec, that was sandwiched within this orientation change.
That's correct, yes. It was in between them.
And next slide.
9:06:52, we have another incoming call from Alex that starts.
And the next one.
And then it ends, the incoming call from Alex ends at 9:06 and 59 seconds.
Now the last slide.
At 9:07, the backlight goes off and it remains off until 9:31 and 44 seconds.
Okay. And do you know from your review of the GM GPS data where the Alec Murdaugh Suburban was at 9:07?
Yes, at 9:07, he was like traveling from the house, or from his home to the house in, I forget the name of the city.
Like right, precisely at 9:07, where was he at that moment?
The 9:07 would be the driveway, I believe.
Right, the driveway.
Yes.
And Maggie's phone, the screen did not come on again until 9:31.
That's correct.
And just one more time, how much motion does it take to turn the screen?
Very little. I mean, just the slightest lift of the phone turns the screen on.
Let the court's indulgent. Please answer any questions from the state. I have no further questions.
All right, thank you.
And before that,
Don't forget your phone.
Conrad. Police court. Mr. Sturgis, how you doing today?
Good afternoon, Mr. Conrad. I'm well, thank you.
I believe at the beginning of your testimony, you testified that you felt it likely there was some location data stored on Maggie's phone from June 7th that potentially was overwritten. Did I understand that correctly?
I said that there was data that was on the phone from June 8th, and that, correction, June 9th, and that data likely could have been on there had it been preserved properly.
And explain to the jury just real quick, how does an iPhone store that GPS information? In generic terms, and then if I need to get more specific, I will.
Sure, so the iPhone keeps that data, and it uses the GPS location, the GPS satellite, triangulates with the GPS satellites, and it stores that data.
Right. And does it store it in a sort of cache?
It does.
All right.
It is a cache.
And when it comes to iOS, as opposed to, say, a standard hard drive, iOS keeps certain databases caches fairly limited, correct? And
That's
doesn't
correct.
allow them to access the entire memory available on a device at any given point, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And do you know, or at least in your training or your investigation, have you been able to determine just how big a typical cache is, at least would have been for Maggie's phone during this time?
No, I didn't research that, no.
Okay.
No, I didn't research that, no.
Okay, so you don't know how long Maggie's phone would have potentially stored GPS information at this during 2021, correct?
That's correct,
Okay.
no.
All right. And just so I understand correctly, you agree that a iPhone will not record an orientation change if the screen is off, correct?
That's correct, yes.
All right. So I believe Mr. Barber handed you his phone to kind of demonstrate this lift to weight thing, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And do you know what model iPhone Mr. Barber has? Did you look at it?
Don't know exactly which iPhone he has.
Okay. And do you know what version of iOS is on Mr. Barber's phone?
I do not know.
And Apple updates its iOS fairly frequently, correct?
They do, yes.
Do you know, at least, we don't know what's on Mr. Barber's phone, but do you know what the current release version is today?
It's 16 point something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you know in your review of Maggie's phone, what version was on Maggie's phone on June 7th of 2021?
I believe that was 14 point something.
I'm sorry.
I think it was 14.6, if I'm not
Okay.
mistaken. It was somewhere in the 14 range.
And are you aware that in some of these iOS updates, some of these sensitivities and some of these settings can change, correct?
Depending on bug fixes and things, yes.
And are you aware of a change that occurred in iOS 15 that changed how iPhones record orientation changes, or when they record orientation changes?
No, I'm not aware of that.
Okay. Okay. Can we go back to I forget, let's see, the PowerPoint? What exhibit was that? I believe it was it 155? Was there two? I just was aware of one. 158? For this witness. This one. And this doesn't have a slide number, so bear with me. But first of all, before we talk about Maggie real quick, you did review Paul's phone to a certain degree, correct?
To a certain extent, yes.
All right. And do you recall from your review of Paul's phone when the last time his phone was unlocked on June 7th of 2021?
I don't recall, no, I'm sorry.
And we can find the state's exhibit if we need to, but would you disagree if I told you it was 8:49 p.m. or shortly thereafter?
If that's what's in the state's exhibit, I don't disagree with that.
Okay. And I believe one of your first slides here is that Maggie's phone locked. Let's see, go to 1, 2, 3 slides. One more. All right, back one, I'm sorry. 8:49:31, and in your review of Maggie's phone found that her phone was locked at 8:49:31, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And it was not unlocked until when, the next day?
The next day, that's correct.
All right, and that's when it was recovered by law
By
enforcement?
law enforcement, yes, sir.
Okay. And did you review Alex's, you said you reviewed Alex's phone to a certain degree too. I think you said the steps, right?
The steps, yes.
And in your review, did you find any steps on his phone between 8:09 and 9:02 p.m.?
Let me go back and take a look at that. (8:09) and 9:02 p.m.
Correct.
Correct. No, I don't recall seeing that. I'm seeing the stuff from the knowledge C here.
Okay, all right. But Maggie's phone's locked at 8:49:31, and it does not unlock till the next day, correct?
That's correct, yes, sir.
Paul's locks for the last time around the same time, correct?
That's correct, yes, sir.
And Paul's phone, in your review, to recall what time the battery died on his phone.
I don't recall, no, sir.
Would you dispute me if I said, and we can find the exhibit if we need to, his phone shut down at about 10:34 p.m.?
If that's what's in the report, I don't dispute it, no, sir.
All right. And would you agree with me if I said that Paul's phone locking at 8:49 and remaining on until 10:34. First of all, it's about, what, hour and a half or so?
That's correct, yes.
And do you know his battery state when his phone locked at 8:49 p.m.?
It was in low power mode.
So it was less than 10%, 2%, something like that?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. And would you agree with me when the fact that his phone remained on until 10:34 be indicative that it wasn't really handled much at all or used at all?
Yes.
Okay. And did you find any other evidence of any usage on Paul's phone after 8:49 that you can recall?
No, I didn't.
Okay. And when I say use, just so it's clear between us, I mean either answering a call, making a call, reading a text, sending a text,
Right.
Orientation change.
And no user interaction with it.
All right. And so let's talk a little bit about the orientation change for a minute. So would you agree that the most likely reason for an orientation change is human interaction, meaning humans using the phone?
Yes.
Are there any other possible explanations when you see an orientation change, or any other explanations that you, in your opinion, that could explain an orientation change?
Only if a phone, was in one position, lit up, fell off, and landed in another position.
Okay.
But no.
And when you see a series of orientation changes, 30 seconds or a minute between each orientation change, it'd be difficult to explain that by a phone just kept falling on its own, correct?
Repeat the question, I'm sorry.
If you see a series of 3 orientation changes, just speaking hypothetically for a moment, if you see a series of 3 orientation changes, say 30 seconds separate them or thereabouts, or a minute separate them, could you explain that? Would it be very likely that a series of falls cause those orientation changes?
It depends on how many falls it was making, but being jostled around in a pocket and the light on, being turned, if it's in a person's hand and being turned back and forth, then that would be the only thing I could indicate with an orientation change.
Okay. All right. Can we pull that slideshow back up, please? Let's see. Let's go forward 1, 2. Let's see here. Okay, 8:53:15. There you go. And this is when Maggie's phone starts showing some steps, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And you would agree that the most likely explanation for this is the phone is moving in some manner, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And those accelerometers are recording, or the bounces are jostling, that would most likely be explained by steps, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Now, you can't tell us who's carrying that phone at this time, can you?
No.
All right, next slide. All right, and so at this 8:53:20, you say there's some Siri usage and a squeezing of the side button. And let's just, is that the only explanation of why you'd see the Siri pop up on a phone, is the squeezing the side button, or are there other possibilities?
There's another possibility of her saying, hey Siri, and then that
Okay.
happens because it's a Siri user interface.
Okay, so there could be another explanation, but it's most likely someone squeezing the side button saying,
Could be
hey,
the side
Siri.
button saying, hey Siri, but it's a user interface with it.
Okay. All right. Go to next slide, please. Actually, let's go to 8:54:34, please. Should be one more. One more. There we go. All right, and here you say the camera gets activated, correct?
That's correct.
And you think the most likely explanation is somebody swiped the camera symbol on a locked phone, correct?
Right, either swipe the camera or touch the bottom button because it's coming from the springboard lock screen.
Okay, we say bottom button. Which button?
If you're looking at an iPhone and my most recent iOS, I think it's 16 point something, in the bottom right corner, there's a button that you can touch and hold and the camera comes on. But when that happens, it comes over from the left and the camera scrolls over.
Okay. And then next slide. And then 8:54:35. This is 1 second later. The camera use ends. Correct.
That's correct. Yeah.
And so, in your opinion, based off the fact that that was used for a total of 1 second, do you think that was someone intending to actually use the camera and take a picture?
I wouldn't know, but I wouldn't think so. I mean, that's just a.
But the camera's
1
only
second.
open for a second, correct?
Right. They couldn't have taken a picture in a second.
All right. All right, 8:55:32. Okay. And we see the orientation change here at 8:55:32. Next slide. And the backlight goes off at 8:55:36, correct?
That's correct. Yes, sir.
We'll go to the next slide. And the backlight's back on 9:03:52. So that's roughly, how long is that? Would you, 8 minutes? I don't know if I'm gonna make you do math, but.
Yeah, about that. Yes,
And so the screen's off for that 8 minutes, correct?
that's correct.
And so, would you agree with me? It does seem likely someone's handling that phone Maggie's phone between 8:53 and 8:55, correct?
Yes,
All right. We see orientation changes. We see the potential button being pushed. Someone's got that phone in their hand, correct?
that's correct.
You can't tell us who, correct?
No, I can't.
And then at 8:55:32, we see kind of an 8-minute gap in activity, correct? Between
Yes.
8:55 and 9:03, correct?
Yes,
Almost as if somebody put that phone down.
yes, that's a possibility.
Whoever had it, correct?
Correct.
And you can't tell us where they put that phone down, right?
No, sir, I can't.
Could they put it in a vehicle,
That's very possible. I don't know.
a golf cart?
I don't know.
Okay, let's go to 9:04:23. Yep. All right. And we see this incoming call from Alex. And you
Yes.
said the screen turns off almost immediately, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
In your opinion, you think somebody actually hit the button to turn
Somebody
the screen
shut
off,
the screen
correct?
off, yes.
Okay. But the screen comes back on at 9:05:44, if we can go to that slide, correct?
Yes,
And then 9:06:12, we see an orientation change, correct?
that's correct. Yes.
And 2 seconds later, we see what? Next slide, please. What is this? What is
That's
this
an
indicate?
incoming call from Alex.
Okay. 2 seconds after the orientation change starts, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. And then go to 9:07. Okay. And the screen goes off at 9:07, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And stays off for, what, roughly 23 minutes?
Yes.
And you just testified with Mr. Barber that Alex's car was sitting just outside his house, correct?
That's according to the documents that I reviewed. Yes.
And I don't know if you have this information in front of you, but did you determine when that GPS data shows his vehicle start to move?
Yes,
After 9:07.
after 9:07?
Well,
The-
first of all, is his vehicle stationary at 9:07?
No, it's in the driveway at 9:07, but it's starts at the house at 9:06 and 52 seconds p.m.
When do you start to see motion, or do you?
9:06 and 52 seconds is where I start to see the motion there.
Okay. And 8 seconds later is when Maggie's screen turns off
Yes,
for 23 minutes?
yes,
And you agree that a iPhone, at least with version 14.6, when the screen's off, it will not record an orientation change, correct?
that's correct.
And you agree with me that you don't know what version iOS that Mr. Barber had on his phone that you just did that demonstration?
That's correct.
Did you conduct any tests with the phone with 14.6 to see what movement can cause it to, or what can cause that phone to the screen to come on?
I don't have any 14.6 phones.
Okay. All right.
1 second. Thank you, Mr. Conrad.
Okay, Mr. Sturgis, you were asked about iOS version 15 and a change in orientation behavior. Is the raise to wake feature something distinct from orientation behavior?
No, the raised awake is a separate from orientation behavior. Raised awake's a separate application within.
Is raised awake the feature that causes the phone to come on with slight movement?
Yes.
Do you have any reason to believe that the raised awake feature that you've already testified was active on Maggie Murdaugh's phone works any different than any iPhone today?
I have no evidence to prove that, no.
And again, you can refer to your notes. When Alec Murdaugh's SUV passed the location where Maggie Murdaugh's phone was recovered, the side of the road, was the screen off?
The screen was off, yes.
It was off as he approached it?
Yes.
And again, how much movement does it take to turn the screen on?
Very little movement.
And this is a separate issue from orientation changes?
That's correct.
But we're talking about, are we talking about movement activating the screen?
That's correct, yes.
Are we talking about the screen being sideways or up? Or
No, we're not talking about the orientation. We're talking about the actual raised awake function on the phone.
The camera usage, and in fact, no picture was taken that you're aware of.
Right, that's correct. I didn't see any photographs there for that
But,
time.
but is it your opinion, what is your opinion about whether someone deliberately activated that
I
camera?
mean, they could have. They could have been an accident. I don't know. I don't know what the person could have been doing, but it was a user interaction with the device.
And there was talk about phones falling to change orientation. Can a phone change orientation without actually falling?
No, I mean, there has to be some type of movement for the phone from portrait to landscape.
Right, but you don't have to drop the phone?
No.
So
So if it's sitting upright, I mean, if it's sitting on its side, I can flip it this way and the orientation changes.
if somebody's running with a phone, can it change orientation?
Yes. Those are user events that can cause that.
Can we pull up what's been previously admitted as Defense Exhibit 45? This is, as I just said, previously admitted. Do you recognize this as GPS data in a cache database?
This looks like a yes, cache for the ZRT cell location database. Yes.
And what's the timestamp for the first entry?
It's 6/9/21 at 2:51 and 21 seconds p.m.
In your opinion, would it be fair to say that if this phone had been extracted or put in a Faraday bag a couple of days earlier, we would have GPS data from 6/7?
And in my opinion, it's likely that we could.
Can we pull up the step data exhibit?
Sorry?
The Apple step data exhibit. Okay, we previously talked about this, Alec Murdaugh's steps. Between entries 27 and 28, you see those time periods? Just want
I
to
do.
remember that and go to the next page. Here we have Maggie's steps. Are there any steps, periods of steps that correspond between Maggie Murdaugh and Alec Murdaugh?
No, I don't see any.
So there's no period where both phones are stepping in the same period.
No.
Okay. And if we stay on this one, if we look at entries 5 and 6, the distance is almost identical, 31 meters.
Yes, it is.
Are the steps different?
The steps are different.
Is that a significant difference?
Not a significant difference for the 5 and 6, no.
So 59 versus 43, so is that 16? It took 16 more steps to go the same distance?
Yes.
So does that indicate shorter steps?
Shorter steps, yes.
Okay, just the final question is to emphasize here. You can't tell us what a phone would do tossed out a window. That's not your expertise.
No, I can't.
But you can tell us how much motion it takes to turn on the screen.
Yes, very little motion.
And you've
Turn the screen
demonstrated
on.
that.
Several times, yes.
And that feature of the iPhone was active on her phone,
Yes,
and it is totally separate from orientation behavior.
that's correct, it is.
No further questions.
Anything further?
Just a couple of things, Your Honor. You said you reviewed Paul's phone. Did you review the video that's been called the Kindle video in this case?
Yes, I have seen the video.
And did you have any information that would lead you to disagree that that video was recorded at 8:44, about 55 seconds on the night of June 7th?
No, I don't have anything.
And the location data, would you agree the location data for that video was recorded at the kennels on the Murdaugh property of Moselle?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Mr. Barber was talking to you about steps data. And just so it's clear to the jury, and I'm going to speak in hypotheticals here for a second, but if you see the iPhone record steps over an interval of about 5 minutes, for example, it records a certain number of steps over that 5 minutes.
Okay.
Does that mean, is that phone trying to tell you that someone's uniformly walking at an exact pace that keeps them moving over that entire 5 minutes?
No, not necessarily.
Okay. They could stop at some point in the middle of that, correct?
That's correct, yes.
All right. And so they could stop and pick something up in the middle of a period showing steps, correct?
That's correct. It's just the steps between those two times.
All right. So you can't testify, you can't tell us if between, pull up the steps exhibit real quick. Next slide. All right. And looking at entry 28 on Alex's phone.
Entry what, I'm sorry? couldn't hear.
28.
28?
Yep.
Okay.
And between 902 and 906, we see, what, 283 steps, is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
All right. And you can't tell us if his phone stopped at any point between those,
No,
what's
no,
that,
it's just
roughly 4 minutes or a little over 4 minutes?
no, just 283 steps between those two times.
So he could have walked 200 of those steps in the first 2 minutes and then only slowed down for the rest of the 2
Right.
minutes, correct? Or it could have been vice versa.
Yes.
Or he could have stopped for an entire minute somewhere in there. You can't tell us any different, correct?
It'd be unlikely to stop for an entire minute. I think if you stop for that long a period of time, a new entry would be made. But
Do you know, is there a cutoff for iOS
no,
that would?
I think that just based off of what I'm seeing here, I mean, for instance, entry 29 and 30, you have about a 3-minute gap there, and
Okay.
yeah,
So maybe if he stopped for a minute, it would have started a new entry? is what
could
you're
have.
saying?
It
All right.
could
But if
have.
he would stop for a shorter period of time, he wouldn't necessarily have, correct?
right.
Okay. All right. And finally, Mr. Barber has asked you about distance, and I think I want to make sure I understood you correctly. I think you testified that you would consider the actual steps count to be more accurate than the distance. Is that
I
correct?
would, yes.
Have you found any research or studies that has measured or the accuracy of steps or distance in iOS devices?
I have, yeah, and for instance, I've had cases where the step count and the GPS data is different sometimes.
Okay.
Yes.
And in your opinion, the steps count is probably more the most accurate?
In my opinion, yeah, the steps
Okay.
count is more accurate.
Okay. No further, sir.
You may step down.